Right now, you're looking at a Canadian millionaire, film director, comic book author, and a human who personally tortured and killed this cute girl, who, by the way, was from KYIV. Sit down more comfortably, dear viewers, because this is scary. So the name of this person is Blake Leibel. He was born in 1981 in Toronto to a truly wealthy family of Lorne and Eleanor Leibel, becoming their second son. From childhood, the brothers were literally bathed in luxury and had everything that other children could only dream of. The story of the whole family, in my opinion, is quite interesting and even deserves a separate video. Because it's, scary too. Today, we will talk about it only briefly, to try to understand the motives of the future killer of a Ukrainian girl. Blake's father, Lorne Leibel, was a public figure and belonged to the Hall of Fame of Canadian motorsport. Moreover, in his time, the man even claimed to participate in the Olympic Games as part of the Canadian national sailing team. Leibel Sr. actually became the first Canadian to fail an Olympic drug test. Sorry for the censorship, it's YouTube after all. But that didn't stop him from pursuing a career and becoming a very successful person. He didn't always make his money from sports, but from his real estate. During the city building boom of the 80s and 90s, Leibel Sr. built his own empire outside of Toronto. His company, Canada Homes, is considered the largest developer in the country at that time. The exact number is unknown, but it was definitely more than 30,000 buildings. Indeed, the man was clearly rich, but his wife wasn't left behind. Eleanor Leibel came from Chitel, a family business that she managed and succeeded, the company that manufactures plastic goods, and at the same time with this company, she got a big monetary capital. Whether it was for wealth or for true love, or maybe both, the Canadian rich found each other, got together, and got married. Soon they had their first son, Cody, and 2 years later, another one, who we already know as Blake. Everything was fine at home, just fairy tale-like. Of course, until it went wrong. Everything changes, and the Leibel's marriage is not an exception. They separated when the children were still very young. Cody continued to live with his father, while Blake stayed with his mother. How exactly they decided to separate children is unknown. Later, the family's former lawyer described the relationship between Lorne Leibel and his son Blake as estranged and not close at all. At the time, Cody had a much more harmonious relationship with his father. They both enjoyed car racing, gambling, and collecting Ferraris. And while Blake's fatherly love may have been lacking, money for living was never an issue. He received alimony both from his mother and father, even into adulthood. It was pocket money for him, so to speak. But there was a lot of zeros in there. In the mid-2000s, Blake moved to Los Angeles with a few wealthy friends, where he immediately joined a company of children of the Toronto elite, who were trying to make a name for themselves in Hollywood. By the way, by then, Blake's older brother Cody had already done this. He founded the C-Note Records label, which was a considerable success. And yet, by that time, Cody was more known for his participation in underground poker games, quite notorious. It was there that he met and became friends with people like Ben Affleck, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Tobey Maguire, and even rumored to have connections with the Russian mafia. Meanwhile, Blake decided to devote his life entirely to creativity and called himself a creator of new worlds. With the support of illustrators and writers, the man began to implement all his ideas in life. However, the biggest fan of Black was himself.
We spend more time to create a work of art of higher quality. We work with experimental details and think that's what sets us apart from others. This is what we like to spend time on, to really show something new. This is not a school. We have no reason to rush or work on this late into the evening.
Leibel spoke about his own comic United Free Worlds at the 2008 Comic-Con in New York. Dubbing for those who are just listening to this video, not watching, because it was written in the previous frame. In addition, Blake worked on an animated story for Spaceballs and created a futuristic story about the psychopath, Psychopomp. And on top of all that, Black wrote the script himself and made a movie based on it. The movie Bald was released on digital versatile disc in 2009 without being shown on big screens. This film did not receive wide acclaim. In fact, almost no one watched it. One of the few critics who managed to have a look at Blake's creativity said that the picture will be liked only by those who enjoy late-night television, which is something you watch only when you are bored or drunk. Here are a few frames from the movie for a better understanding.
Oh my god, I think he's going bald.
I'm 20 years old and I'm losing all of my hair. In short, not really good. Those who knew Blake said that already in those years, not everything was going smoothly for him. He abused substances, not just alcohol, and invested money in grandiose projects, which usually led to nothing. From time to time, he would come to local comic book stores and try to give away his graphic novels for free. But they probably weren't picked up by a lot of people, even with that approach. The former co-author of the comics with whom Blake worked later said that he often missed meetings and, it seemed, was obsessed with themes of violence. Leibel himself created the concept for the graphic novel Syndrome, which was released in 2010. We need to talk a little more about this work, as it is quite significant in this whole story. Syndrome tells the story of a Dr. Wolf Chattel, a sadist neuropathologist, and his experiments. As you might have noticed, this character has the maiden name of Blake's mother. Another hero of the novel is a serial killer who murders people. And it's very important. Remember this moment. He does this by cutting the victim's throat and hanging them by the feet, letting the blood drain. In the plot, Dr. Chattel tries to figure out the murderer and find a cure for his illness. He believes that evil is a disease that makes people commit heinous acts. Blake wrote a mysterious 2-page intro to this novel where he asked, "If you would have liked harming people, what would you do?" Moreover, he described his novel that way.
Syndrome is a story about resilience on several levels. It's about how 4 characters who come from different worlds are all drawn into this gigantic, endlessly modeled environment. In this sense, it's the best behind-the-scenes story.
But for the sake of fairness, it's worth noting that it's unclear how much influence Blake had on the final result of the final product. Industry veterans who worked on the novel indicated in their interviews that Leibel only gave them a concept, and they did the rest themselves. Regardless, the scenes from this novel will later be associated with the murder of the Ukrainian girl. However, from the Leibel's point of view, his real problems began after his mother's death in 2011 when she died from brain cancer. His mother was the closest person to him, and her death knocked Blake off balance. She was truly an anchor for him, as said by one of his friends. Blake received most of his inheritance after his mother's death, including a house in Toronto worth $5.5 million, and other assets worth several more millions. However, the man did not show up for the funeral. He decided 2 years after his mother's death to take things to court, trying to challenge the will in which she named him and his brother Cody as heirs. Blake considered this unfair, since Cody had never lived with them and was mostly under the great influence of their father. In fact, during this case, Leibel confessed that he almost had no income of his own. After Eleanor's death, as he told the court, he had to rely on his father to pay the bills. By the way, by that time, Black was already over 30. Father claimed that he and his wife had been supporting Blake's life in Los Angeles for a long time, and they themselves had spent almost $1.8 million on him. And all this time, the boy still couldn't stand on his own feet. Insanity. But maybe we just can't understand the problems of wealthy people? Blake lost his case against his own mother in court. It's not just that he didn't receive extra inheritance, but he also owed $400,000 in the form of unpaid fees to the law firm that represented his interests. As we can see, at that moment, the financial affairs of the comic maker and director were not going very well. Well, he still had a significant asset worth $5.5 million and his father's money from time to time, so in principle, everything was very, very good for him. Moreover, Blake's personal life was generally quite wonderful. Well, at least at first. In March 2011, Blake got engaged to Amanda Brown, a former model. This happened just a month before she gave birth to their first son. They lived together in a mansion in Beverly Hills with a beautiful lemon tree in the yard. During his encounters with Amanda, Blake was described as eccentric and unpredictable. However, at the same time, they said he was quiet, kind and friendly, clearly happy in the relationship. Then in 2015, when Amanda was already 8 months pregnant, which would be her second pregnancy, she suddenly found herself alone, as Blake abruptly left her. Why? Well, one of his friends said that he became paranoid and at some point just decided to break up not only with his girlfriend, but with most of his friends. Others said that he was going through a midlife crisis, and his life changed so drastically. At some point before officially breaking up with Amanda, Blake had already started new relationships. With Yana Kasyan, who had previously worked in the Ukrainian tax inspection, the American dream brought the girl to the States in 2014, where they met with the Leibel. Blake's acquaintances got to know Yana as a pleasant, beautiful woman with a light Eastern European accent and beautiful eyes. The lawyer from the divorce, who represented Blake, said that he remained very close to his son and hoped to part with his wife amicably. But the wife's lawyer bluntly stated that one day Blake just disappeared and never made contact again. Not long after, Leibel's ex-wife gave birth to another son from him, and a couple of months later, Yana was already pregnant. By the way, Amanda Braun found out about her man's new girlfriend quite by accident. She literally stumbled upon her on the street near Blake's apartment. How Blake and Yana's domestic relationship looked is unknown. The only known fact is that he lived with her in another apartment that he inherited from his mother, in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods of Los Angeles. There are photos that testify to the fact that their relationship was really not bad. They looked happy at certain moments. He kept his gaze fixed on the girl, incessantly lavishing her with costly presents.
My new car from my dear lover. With a white interior, leather, look, $84,000.
So Yana was looking forward to the new present. Blake was probably present at the celebrations, supporting Yana, just holding her hand. In the family archive videos, he looked like an ordinary enchanted man and a happy father of a newborn daughter. That's how his friends and relatives described him, who were still with him at that moment. Indeed, in Blake's fatherhood, they wondered about another woman. Some who knew Brownie Kasyan claim he was in a relationship with Constance Bukafuri. And this very unhealed wound of deception changed him as a person forever. However, there is no endless confirmation of this theory. It's just, people talk in Hollywood. Let's get closer to the truth. Indeed, on May 3rd, Yana Kasyan gave birth to a child from Blake. And just 2.5 weeks after that, the family was heading towards the end. On May 20th, 2016, he was arrested for assaulting a woman and allegedly for plotting. This woman wanted to remain anonymous, although some media reported that the complaint was filed by his own wife, Constance Bukafuri. After the arrest, Black spent 15 years behind bars. He was later released on $100,000 bail reportedly paid by Yana Kasyan. The Leibel was waiting for a court decision on the lawsuit at home. But when Yana learned the details about the incident and its causes, she immediately moved out of the house where she lived with Blake and moved in with her mother. She had already moved from KYIV to Los Angeles at that time to help her daughter with the upbringing of her granddaughter. On May 24th, 2016, Leibel called Yana and said that he was very sorry. He couldn't live without her. The emotional call, apparently, made the girl reconsider her decision to leave Blake. And this is just one of the versions that the media spread. According to another, everything was significantly more brutal. Kasyan was still recovering after Kassar's Rostin when the Leibel threatened to leave her if she didn't have sex with him. He constantly told Yana that he was leaving her for another woman, just as he had imagined.
He treated her like Maestrub. He wanted her to do everything he wanted.
According to this version, Black sent Yana several messages, after which she decided to come to him to talk. Whether or not Jacob's version was true, their fate was the same. Yana disappeared. Her mother quickly suspected that something was wrong, especially when Yana did not return from the meeting either within an hour or even 2. She didn't show up late in the evening, and not even the next day, and she also didn't answer her phone calls. Then Olga Kasyan, the girl's mother, went to the village of Leibel and started to search and knock on doors. But no one answered. The next day, the desperate mother asked the police for help. The police agreed to check if everything was all right, but they only confirmed that they also knocked on the door. Olga wanted them to break the locks and go inside, but the police didn't have the right to do that. There was no sign. Even Yana disappeared less than an hour ago, and no sounds came from Blake's building that would indicate any problems. And there were no signs that anyone was there. And breaking into private property without a good reason is prohibited by law in the United States. Olga was in a panic as she was convinced that she heard some noise coming from the building.
There Yana lies, presumably half dead. These two windows here.
Jinka tried to convince the defenders that the situation was not desperate. Donka gave birth less than a month ago, and her husband was arrested on the suspicion of conspiracy. At that moment, Yana Kasyan's mother had been hiding under the building for 3 days, and only then did the police finally decide to force the doors open. It turned out to be not so simple, and not just because the doors were locked with a number of locks, but also because they were barricaded. They went through the kitchen's back door and reached the bedrooms, and the scene they encountered there shocked everyone. In the locked room, Black Leibel was lying on the bed, and next to him was the lifeless body of Yana Kasyan. I already guessed today about the novel Syndrome, the author of which is Black Leibel. So from the disease, you see an illustration of him, and on the right, real photos from the scene of the crime which Black committed. On this closed mattress and found the body of Yana Kasyan. YouTube is quite tolerant of similar content, so there is censorship here, dear. You can find all the materials in the Scary Telegram channel as usual. We learn from mistakes, subscribe. And by the way, a special issue has just been released on Telegram, which will not be on YouTube, it is only on Telegram, because YouTube simply does not let it through. Follow the link in the description and subscribe, it's interesting there. The Leibel agreed to cooperate with the police and even agreed to come out of the room. Lieutenant Dave Coleman said they needed a little time to get inside, and even more to get the Leibel out. He was described as a disoriented person who did not realize what was happening with Coyle. Black threw all the blame on his address and prevented any involvement in Yan's death. Shedding light on the events leading up to the arrest only complicated the investigation in Rostina. It turned out that Yan's death was very painful and long. The girl received a blunt object blow to the head, and then Blake tortured and stabbed her.
After examining the victim's remains, detectives who investigated the crime scene found that the woman's body was mutilated,
said Captain Stefan Katz, who was working on the case. The police still couldn't figure out how Blick managed to drain all the blood from Yana, but he did it. From the girl's head, Leibel removed the scalp, leaving it on the pillow, and simply tore off the other parts. In addition, he cut off her right ear and simply tore off the right side of her face with his hands. This is how he describes what happened behind the closed doors of Bleak's apartment with the mother of the murdered Olga Kasyan.
He completely removed the scalp and continued to torture her. He cut off her ear. He removed half of her right cheek. There was a terrible bite near her throat. There was a strong blow from the left side of the jaw. He ripped off her eyebrows, which were lying between the mattresses.
However, Black ignored this. Police discovered 11 disposal garbage bags in the basement. They were filled with bedding and clothes, parts of Kasyan's body, as well as large clumps of her hair and scalp. The police also found a bloody razor blade and scissors, which served as murder weapons.
I've never seen anything like this before. I wonder if any forensic experts in this country or beyond could see this. Crimea, possibly, in wartime. Such things happen extremely rarely,
said Dr. James Wright from the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, who handled Kasyan's case. Black's former friend insisted that it's important not to confuse the reality of the crime and what was depicted in the novel Syndrome, authored by Leibel.
It was quite similar, as if someone had drawn a connection between these two pictures.
The man who claimed to be Black's former friend then insisted on remaining anonymous. The Leibel was hovering over the Ukrainian mountains. The evidence suggests that from the moment he removed the scalp from her to her death, approximately 8 hours had passed. He was making cuts just to eat. Blake repeatedly instructed the delivery to leave the food at the doorstep and warned the courier not to knock on the door, but to leave the order on the porch. There are even frames from the surveillance camera of the man receiving the delivery. Prosecutors say that for some time Blake lay next to Yana's body, then tried to hide the traces of the crime. Despite trying to clean the apartment, traces of the woman's blood were found everywhere, even in the kitchen sink pipe. There were clear handprints, one of which definitely came from Leibel's hand. It was easy to identify, as Blake is missing part of his finger. In Ukraine, Yana was returned in a zinc coffin. The mother spent a month and a half collecting money to bring her body to KYIV. The family refused to open the coffin. The girl's mother couldn't attend the funeral, as she was fighting for custody of her granddaughter Kasyan in Leibel at the time. The court reviewed Yana's murder case for a full 2 years. During the description of the case details, the jury would occasionally leave the courtroom, but Olga Kasyan's mother never missed a moment. On the last day of the trial, when the prosecutor was presenting her closing arguments, she showed everyone 2 photos. One of them depicted Kasyan as she was a few months before her death, a smiling brunette with big brown eyes. And on the other was a picture of her beaten face, which was barely recognizable. But it was the same person. Why did Black do this to Yana? Seems like we just have to skip. Prosecutors believe that he killed the girl due to jealousy and anger that arose in him against the background of her increased attention to the child, as well as because he needed constant power and control over his victim. And even though Blake was blamed for the quality and persistence of the girl, he never admitted his guilt, and it was relentless. The jurors were unanimous in their decision on June 20th, 2018. Blake has been serving a life sentence in a California prison since then. American media described the crime as heinous and possibly the most heinous murder in the history of West Hollywood, if not all of Los Angeles. Johnny's mother made another call to Blake to pay her $56 million for the benefit of the child. The court satisfied this claim even for a lesser amount. Kasyan received $41.6 million from the Leibel and became the guardian of little Diana Dorina. And their family never had to worry about Black Leibel not paying for the child. Dear ones, if you've watched this video up to this second, you know you're the best. Please take care of yourself, stay healthy, and don't let anyone upset you. Thank you to everyone who supports this channel. You can do this from 10 hryvnias a month by formalizing official sponsorship from YouTube. This was Sonia. See you next week, and in the meantime, share this video or this one. They are also cool. Thank you.